stand to speak about the Parliamentary Service Amendment Bill 2014, and in particular Schedule 1, about which the Australian Greens have some concerns, because it's the view of the Greens that this schedule both creates an unnecessary position on the Security Management Board and formalises operational measures as part of the board's remit, both of which the Australian Greens believe are regrettable. Schedule 1 of the bill seeks to formalise an Australian Federal Police position on the Security Management Board, and whether it's the Commissioner or another representative as listed, the Greens believe that this is unnecessary. And that's because Section 65(a) of the Parliamentary Service Act 1999 already permits the board to invite the heads of other organisations to attend or to be represented at its meetings. The Australian Greens believe that this discretionary power is sufficient and it's not necessary to formalise that particular position. In addition, the expansion of the board's remit to include the operation of security is also a concern, particularly in light of recent developments such as recent ill-thought-through decisions and discussion, which was subsequently reversed, about face coverings in Parliament, and also recent steps that have been taken with respect to the introduction of firearms within the chambers of Parliament. The Australian Greens are gravely concerned that these developments have seen a move towards what really can be characterised as a militarisation of public space in Australia, and it's our view that these changes in the bill will further this trend. The Australian Greens do not support firearms being carried inside the Parliament. We believe that this is a clear divergence from long-standing practice and convention in the Westminster system, that no arms are carried in Houses of Parliament, and we're concerned that this particular change seeks to embody rhetoric of fear in practice by integrating it into our discussions about our Parliament and our security. We have to ask just what kind of message are we sending to the greater Australian public if we say that parliamentarians can't go about their business without being surrounded by armed security. The use of arms in Parliament is a breach of a Westminster Convention that dates back to the time of King Charles I and the English Civil War, so that since the 1640s weapons have been banned from parliamentary precincts. The fact is, the Australian Greens believe firmly that more guns don't make people safer. We don't want a militarisation of our public spaces, and we believe that Australians don't want that either, and that particularly includes Parliament. We don't want to go the way of America, where it's claimed that only a good guy with a gun can stop the bad guys. That's not the experience in Australia. It's never been the case in Australia, and it shouldn't start now. In particular, the Australian Greens are very concerned about the political context for the changes that are proposed in this bill. We're living at a time when we have seen, regrettably, a ratcheting up of rhetoric around national security, and particularly by this particular government. Yes, there are serious national security concerns to be had. There is a willingness on the part of the Australian public to engage in discussion, in thoughtful discussion about how that has to be managed, but there is also a strong view among many that there has been a rhetoric that's been employed by this government for their own political ends. So we've seen comments and speeches by both ministers and especially the Prime Minister which have actually served to heighten fear and division in the Australian community. Ironically and unfortunately and destructively, I think, for this fabric of Australian society, this rhetoric actually risks making our security worse, not better, particularly for individual Australians, some of them who have become the focus of fear, hatred and increased ugly prejudice by other Australians. So we've seen increases in attacks and bullying against Muslim women and other women and men who happen to wear headgear through some kind of xenophobia or misunderstanding. So not just Muslims but Sikhs and people from other religious and ethnic backgrounds. This is not a good thing for Australia. This is a destructive thing for Australia. And I've heard anecdotes from parents about children even being bullied in schools now, and increased bullying because of their religious or ethnic backgrounds. The Australian Greens believe that true security in Australia relies on cohesion and unity. Policies, rhetoric and leadership that actually brings out the best in us as a people. The sorts of leadership that actually plays to the strengths that we all know we have in multiculturalism, the sort of leadership and the sort of speeches and values enunciated by our leaders that highlights and reinforces the decency and the common values that we share, like the idea that people in Australia should have a fair go. And it's what has attracted so many to come from other places to make a home here, and is what has made such loyal citizens of people who have come and become Australian citizens. It's these values, it's this leadership, which will enable Australians ultimately to stand together to refute the horror and the cruelty that is so un-Australian, that is personified by organisations like ISIS. So coming back to the bill under discussion, the Greens don't support moves towards militarisation of our public spaces, including the Parliament, and we are concerned that this bill is a step towards this outcome. The Australian Greens believe that this is, or can be seen as representing another attempt to scare people into believing that we are unsafe and divided, and the Greens will continue to rebut what we see as unnecessary, sometimes fear-driven, self-serving and ultimately destructive and counterproductive rhetoric of this government when it comes to national security.